Did you know those Free Palestine supporters often claim Israel created Hamas? Please explain Hamas to them.
It's one of the topics. It's one of the most widely spread myths. This last war, Israel created Hamas. No, that's not the case. Hamas was created at the end of the 80s in 1987 by an arch-terrorist named Ahmad Yassin. This Ahmad Yassin, he was part of what is known as the Muslim Brotherhood. For those who don't know, the Muslim Brotherhood was an Islamic movement that was created at the beginning of the 20th century, in the 20s, from 1920 onwards, 21, 22. And the theory was created by a radical jihadist Muslim named Al-Banna. Whose theory is this? What he saw was that early 20th century Muslim society was very corrupt. Why? Because they were very westernized. How is it possible that now our Muslim youth listen to music? How is it that women now go without veils and show their hair? How is it possible that now women are going to study? What? That's crazy. Then Al-Banna says, all the troubles we're going through, what are the troubles we're going through? It's that the West was taking land from Islam. Think about it. Until that moment, there was the Ottoman Empire, which had managed to conquer and expand all over the planet Earth, all over the globe. The Ottoman Empire, which was the last caliphate in the world, reached Europe. It reached as far as Austria. That is to say, there were other areas where Islam reached Spain. They controlled half of Spain centuries ago, before Granada's reconquest, and the actions of the Catholic monarchs. But what happens is that, it says, the Ottoman Empire starts to shrink until it ends. Why? Because the British powers in the First World War start to defeat the Ottomans. And that's how the Westerners take over the Middle East. They take everything that is the Levant and they divide up the Middle East. In what is known as the Sykes-Picot Agreements, which is a treaty between England and France to decide how to divide the powers of the Middle East. And that's how Syria is taken by France and Jordan is taken by England. That's how they divided up. Jordan didn't exist yet. The British Mandate divided the area into French and English colonies. What happens in the Muslim world is a major short circuit. How is it possible that the great Muslim empire fell into the hands of these infidels, these European foreigners? The answer that Al-Banna proposed is that it is because of the great sins of the Muslims. Because the Muslims turned away from Islamic law. Allah, or God as they call him, is punishing them. This is because they are no longer devout 7th century Muslims, like in Muhammad's time, or Mahoma in Spanish. So Allah is punishing them, and the punishment is that he is taking their lands away, and the punishment is all of this. So what's the solution? As Al-Banna says, we have to return to Islam just as it was with the Prophet Muhammad, and that is Islam in its most archaic form. That is Islam whose objective was war. Because if you read the biography of Muhammad as well as Al-Tabari and all those who wrote the biography, that everything he did in life was raiding caravans, taking women as slaves. That was it. That's how Islam spread, by the sword. So what they said was, we have to return to the concept of jihad. And this theory of the Muslim Brotherhood had ramifications around the world. One of the ramifications which was seen in the area of Iraq, more towards that region, it was called Al-Qaeda. That one of the daughters of the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda. Another daughter of the Muslim Brotherhood is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and others, and so on. One of the branches that comes from that same school is Hamas. Hamas, with that same idea of what it's doing. At that time, there were actually several other groups. But one of the groups that was carrying out terror against Israel was the Palestine Liberation Organization. It was a terrorist group led by a radical as well, a Muslim, but not with an Islamic religious focus, rather with a nationalist focus. Their focus was simply to expel the Jews because he brought an entire political theory from Tunisia. That's for another video. Arafat created the Palestinian Liberation Organization, whose only goal was destroying Israel. He made it in 1964. But Ahmed Yassin criticizes them for not being Muslim enough, since he comes from the school of Hassan al-Banna and the Muslim Brotherhood. So what Ahmad Yassin does is that he creates a liberation group. That's what Hamas actually means. A liberation based on Islamic law, specifically its most archaic form. That's how Hamas was founded. What happens? At first, Israel, and that's what Europe is suffering from now. So how do these Islamic movements start? They start by doing something called dawah. Dawah is like social action. They go and help the poor, the sick, widows, orphans, and they do social work. They visit the mosque, shop at markets, and help out. So what does Israel, the naive state of Israel, do in 1987? They see that there's a group that is proposing, and it's true, they openly say hostile things against Israel, but in fact they are doing what a religious group does. Israel thought, just as the ultra-Orthodox Haredim in Israel avoid military service, Hamas is like Islam's ultra-Orthodox. They're not doing, because just between us at that time, in the early 80s, late 80s, this global jihad didn't exist like we see it today, which nowadays is explicit. We see groups like Boko Haram, the Taliban, Al-Shabaab, the Houthis, and Al-Nusra, all terrorists. No, not all Muslims are terrorists, but nearly all terrorist groups, except Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and Colombia, are Muslim. But then Israel naively says it's just a social action group. Let's support them because, on the other hand, we have the psychopaths from the Palestine Liberation Organization who are hijacking planes, who are blowing up shopping centers. They're carrying out the first intifada, which happened exactly in those years and during that period. So let's support this group that's doing social work, this little group called Hamas, a harmless little group. So at first, Israel did help spread the social work of Hamas. This is true because of the naivety that they weren't doing anything military up to that point in Europe. And let me make a brief parenthesis. The exact same thing is happening in Europe. They're not realizing it in Europe. And that's not just my opinion. Leaders from the United Arab Emirates have denounced it. Leaders from Bahrain have denounced it. They've denounced it. That in Europe, they have Muslim Brotherhood groups as non-governmental organization. So how do you say non-governmental organization? Muslim Brotherhood non-governmental organization. In England, in the heart of England, doing dawah. And what they're doing is this social action of Islam. Most people don't realize, because they haven't studied history, that they haven't seen what we experienced firsthand in Israel. It's that the step between dawah and jihad is actually a very thin line, very thin. Overnight, Hamas resorts to weapons and begins committing terrorist acts. Those who watched the 47-minute video from October 7 or saw related documentation, no, not even Alfred Hitchcock in his horror movies, not even Quentin Tarantino could have come up with things as deranged as what Hamas did. When Netanyahu spoke at the United Nations, he wore a pin with a QR code on it. I didn't go in because I know, and I don't want to see it again. I don't want that scratch on my heart again. But if you want to see proof of what the madness of radical Islam is, go in and see that. That's Hamas, so it's a myth. Now, Israel hands over the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, as you rightly mentioned. Elections were held in the Gaza Strip and Hamas won, meaning they were elected by the people. If you look at the polls, the ones from September, the majority of the Palestinians, as they call themselves, that is, the Arabs of Judea and Samaria and the Arabs of Gaza, the majority support Hamas and not Fatah. There are two main parties, Hamas and Fatah, with most people supporting Hamas. Smaller parties exist too. Despite all the tragedy they've caused in Gaza, they still support them. So Israel saw that here, that once Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, the Israeli government said, well, de facto, we have this radical Islamic group that took over the Gaza Strip. We can't do anything because we already gave it up. What do? Israel was indecisive. Should we reconquer Gaza? No, fearing global judgment. So, well, what you have to do is learn to live with this psychopathic neighbor. And with a psychopathic neighbor, you have to maintain a hot-cold relationship. For a long time, Israel naively believed that keeping the radical population economically stable and in a good modus vivendi would prevent war. Parenthesis. That was one of Israel's many naive beliefs at the time. For example, Osama bin Laden led the West's worst terrorist attack, and then October 7th marked two of the worst in modern history. But the attack on the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001, bin Laden's family are magnates, millionaires, multimillionaires. One would think it's because they're in a situation of poverty that they go to war. No, do you know how the leaders of Hamas live? They're like billionaires. They have more money than Taylor Swift. They live in mansions in Qatar. And the point is that Israel believed in that naive theory that if you give them treats and keep like a status where you can live in Gaza, then they won't do anything. Israel forgot that Albana's theory is much stronger. That is, the hatred of Israel, the hatred of the West, and especially of Jews in Islamic literature is much heavier. It's heavier than their will to live. That's just how it is. That's what they say. Hamas leaders have said it themselves. We sanctify death more than we love life, because that's one of the concepts of the martyr in Islam, the Shahid. That's it. Death in war offers you much, granting direct entry to paradise. So yes, that's what Israel did. Israel maintained a, let's say, coexistence, also economic, allowing, for example, the transfer of money from Qatar to Gaza. For example, if money came from Qatar, Israel allowed it into Gaza. And that's why one of those many myths was born, that Israel financed Hamas, that Israel created Hamas, but they're just myths from a poor analysis of the situation by Israel. That's the story. And actually, people, for example, it makes me laugh. For example, you have Spaniards saying that Israel created Hamas, Spain donates money to Hamas. Your pockets in Spain, if any Spaniards are watching this video, your taxes are sent directly to the magnates of Qatar, to the Hamas leaders in Qatar, and to Gaza. In Gaza, there are hospitals and centers, and there are buildings with European plaques, with the flag of Germany, the European Union, and Spain. They are everywhere. So yes, part of it. So, in the West, Spain financed Hamas. Yes, Spain financed Hamas. They financed them up to this very moment. Plus, you saw what Pedro Sanchez said, and now he repeated it. I think it was the Prime Minister of Norway, I believe it was. Or from Switzerland, sorry, not Sweden, I meant a Scandinavian country, that were going to allocate I don't know how many millions of dollars for the reconstruction of Gaza. They're already funding Gaza's reconstruction, even though Hamas still controls it. Basically, they're giving millions to Hamas. That's it. 1 + 1 is 2. So, that's the reason why there's the myth that Israel created Hamas. That's false, because it's because of Hamas and Yassin with a radical ideology. If Israel created Hamas, why does Hamas's founding charter call for Israel's destruction? It says no. Look it up. It's on Google. Hamas founding charter. Which, how does it go? The prologue. That's how it starts. That all those international forums and diplomacy are useless. The only way out is jihad. We won't stop until all of Palestine, which they call Israel, is liberated. This is the great asymmetry that exists here. A democratic country that has given them peace for 7 or 8 decades. Before Palestinians existed, Israel offered peace. Versus on the other side, these terrorists insist Israel cannot exist, highlighting the conflict's asymmetry. That's the main point, which is why the claim that Israel created Hamas doesn't make sense. I hope that in this brief historical account, I have answered you.
Well, before we finish, yes, very clear, so that our friends from Free Palestine understand, so they stop lying, right? So they worship Ahmed Yassin, they adore him. So could we say that Ahmed Yassin was a Zionist, was Jewish, or was pro-Jewish? So,
well, in other words,
yeah, well, so I'll say goodbye. Thank you, Jewish philosophy, and we'll stay in touch, because I always watch your videos and I like the way you express yourself, and you're very pedagogical in this sense. Thank you.
Thank you for your question and best wishes. Stay strong in defending the good cause. Long live.
Long live Israel. Long live Israel.